We turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 16. We've got a few that I know were not here last week. So just to give everybody kind of a better understanding of what we are doing. So next quarter we begin a 3 3/4 year study through the Bible, where we're going to start in Genesis and work all the way through Revelation. And so what we are doing this quarter is prepping for that study. And we talked last week how all of us have a certain level of Bible knowledge. We all have certain things that may be different for every one of us, things that we can recall very easily, some things that maybe, we've heard it, maybe a little bit fuzzy, and some things that maybe you hear something and that doesn't even ring a bell. And so what we're trying to do is take all of this information that we do have, organize it in such a way that it is more readily available in our minds, and then fill in any gaps. So we talked about the example last week of the Hudsons moving in and us putting the boxes in the garage, and if we put everything on the shelf, that they basically had two options after everybody left. They can leave it where it's going to be just a box of stuff here and here and here, and there's no organization to it whatsoever, or they can organize it in such a way that they're going to know where things are. Well, if they do that, they may also recognize, we have a gap. There's some things that we actually don't have that we need. And so this organization kind of helps us with that as well. And so we're doing this in what Brother Bob Waldron has referred to as the 3-cycle approach. 3 cycles. So cycle 1 is the 17 time periods where we're way up top. We're looking down at the Bible. We've divided all of the Bible up into 17 time periods, and that's what we're focused on. Cycle 2, we're going to zoom in a little bit closer, and we're going to look at the individual stories, the most important stories in each of those time periods, get those in our minds. And then cycle 3, we're going to take those stories and put Bible passages with them. And one of the things that I mentioned last week that we will do as we go through, when I taught this back in 2018, I had people marking their Bibles. This is the end of time period 1, the beginning of time period 2. It's a good marker for me because I've had my Bible for 25 years, so I know where everything is at. I may not know the exact passage, but I know where it's at on the page and I can find it. And so this will help us too with remembering these things. So 2 Timothy 3, 16 and 17. Start back here in the back. Brother Tim, can you read that for us?
All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work.
All right, so 1, do we believe that? Do we believe that this is true, that the Bible is God's Word, and that it is profitable for all of these things? I hope that we do. And if we do believe that, how do we make this profitable for all of these things to us? I mean, is it just, well, it's profitable. I'm going to set it right over here. It's pretty profitable. Gil?
Study it so that you can get it in your head or in your heart.
Okay.
Yeah. And we talked about, all of us have had that test or that material that we didn't know very well. And we wanted to just stick the book under our pillow as we slept and hope that, osmosis was going to work. And obviously we know that is not going to work. And so for us, we have to make sure that we're not just looking at the Bible as black and white words or red letters on a page. We've got to be able to transfer the words, as Gil said, either to our minds, to our hearts. That's where we've got to put it. And so that's what we're trying to do in this one quarter, basically try to organize again the Bible. And as I mentioned, we all know quite a bit about the Bible, but we may have gaps. And one of the things that they tell you is when you already know quite a bit about a certain subject, it's a lot easier to add information to that. And so we're all starting from a better place. We're not starting at level 0, at ground level. We all have a certain amount of knowledge that we're going to be able to build on. So we mentioned Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. I think that we're all familiar with that passage, but this idea that these words, they're to be on our hearts. And so we're to be teaching them to our children, but we're also supposed to be studying them ourselves and making sure that they become part of our hearts. So these are the three objectives. So for those that weren't here last week, as we go through the quarter, the three objectives that Brother Bob Waldron sets forth is, one, etch into the students' minds the basic facts of Bible history. It is a well-established fact that effective repetition is more helpful in learning than one prolonged explosion. I did it again. Exposure. That's our new word. Prolonged exposure. You should never forget that now because of exposure. All right? Learning done in cycles that are repeated provide for this effective repetition. And I mentioned last week that all of the kids' classes that I teach, the expectation that I have is that they're going to study this stuff at home. We're going to go over it again in class. We're going to review it in class. We're going to review it in class. And so repetition breeds remembrance. And so I'm not asking for anybody to memorize anything. I don't want anybody memorizing anything in regards to what we're doing. I want us to learn it. I want us to learn it together. And so we're going to go at a little bit of a slower pace, especially once we get past this first cycle, to review over and over and over and over. And so I've been asked, a couple people have asked me, well, I don't really know how to study for this class. Well, we're focused right now just on cycle 1. Things go well, we'll get through with cycle 1 tonight. We may have to finish it up the first of next week. So starting next week, we'll definitely start getting into cycle 2. And so start reviewing the first part of cycle 2 for the first few time periods, and we'll just continue to work from there. And I mentioned I will have quizzes. It's not to scare anybody. It's not to embarrass anybody. This is to challenge each other to make sure that we are learning the material. Objective number 2, provide organization for the knowledge that is gained from Bible study. Through this organization, we hope to provide better access to the knowledge one has. This organization also helps a more nearly permanent retention of knowledge. And again, we talked about that, having this information much more readily available, where it's not stuck way back here in the back of our mind, but when we're told something or when we hear something, it's right here on the forefront of our mind. And then number 3, see that the Bible records the fulfillment of a plan, God's plan for the ages. This study takes the student through the Bible 3 times, and it does it in such a way that the student has to look at the Bible story as a whole. And I've emphasized this many times, even outside of this Bible class. We have to recognize that this is the story of Jesus Christ. And that's why we start. I have that picture that's on the front of all of the books that we do, and it's Jesus written out in the books of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. We have to make sure that we see that. We have to make sure that we understand that. And we also have to understand that when we go through the story of the Bible, so much of it is narrative, that these are real events, these are real people, these things really happened. We need to understand that because that's faith building. But we also need to understand that and recognize that so that when we're teaching, because a lot of people that are in here are going to be teaching downstairs. We have to make these things come alive to the students, to impress upon them. These are real places, real people, real events. These things really happen, and this is the real story of Jesus. All right, so cycle number 1. So we got through just a little bit of this last week, and I said, well, when I give you the first time period, you should automatically get the second time period. So what was the first one? All right, so everybody remember? Before the flood, and remember what we're representing. So this is creation and the fall of man. And so you've got before the flood and then after the flood, right? All right, so if we just did before the flood and after the flood, we'd still be in that time period today, because that's in everything after the flood. And so that was something we talked about last week too. Why is there 17? Why not 79? Why didn't we divide, or why didn't Brother Bob divide the time periods up into 79? It'd be a whole lot harder to remember. Some of y'all that have photographic memories, it probably would be not too bad, but 17 makes sense and in his mind, and for those of you that have studied it a few times, I think that it probably is starting to make sense to you as well. Norm?
I thought of the story of the 3 bears, and the baby bear's porridge was just right.
It's just 17, just right.
Just right.
All right, so obviously if before the flood is number 1, one of the things that we've talked about is we've got 17 time periods, but they're all connected. Okay, it's not just a time period and a time period and a time. There's a connection. There's a link. It's all like a continuous chain. And so there are, and I think Brother Bob did this as kind of a memory tool to try to help you remember. And so what took us from before the flood to the flood? Okay, so the wickedness of mankind, and God's going to now destroy the everything in the earth outside of Noah and his wife and kids and their wives. And so that ties before the flood to the flood, and that's something that you can obviously help you in remembering how are we getting from one time period to the next. All right, so we've got the flood, and so again, you've got before the flood, the water rising. And I mentioned, for those of you that's maybe the first time, we're going to go through the hand motions. This is a tool. Obviously, it should help us learn it, but it's very important for the children. We talked in the teacher training program, use as many senses as possible. And so you could not say a word, and if you walk up to some of these kids and you just went, they're going to know exactly what it is. Or you do like this. And see, we might think somebody's typing and they're doing a horrible job. See, they know what that is. So we're going to go through the hand motions. All right, so we've got the flood. And what was the next one that we talked about? All right, scattering of the people. So what's the tie between the flood and the scattering of the people? What's the link? So we talked about after the flood, the ark landed, and where did it land? All right, so see, everybody almost always remembers that. And so when after that happened, what does Noah's sons, what do they do?
One place, and they wanted to build the Tower of Babel.
Okay. Miss Francis?
They proceeded to build the Tower of Babel, and so then our next time period will be the scattering of the people.
Okay. So you've got that connection there, and so yes, the family moves. And does anybody remember kind of the valley of where they moved to? Shinar or Shinar, depends on if you're from Tennessee or Indiana or California. Yeah. So after the flood, Noah's family, obviously it's going to grow rather large. And how many sons did he have? What were they? All right. Which one is the one that the focus is on? All right, man. See, you already got this figured out. All right, so they travel down. Obviously, they were going to all join together in this one location, and they're going to build the Tower of Babel. And is this what God wanted? Is this what He asked them to do? All right, hence the scattering of the people. So from the scattering of the people, then the Bible focuses on Shem, like we talked about. And so if you'll actually look at a map, and if you look at where kind of the descendants of the three sons of Noah ended up, you've got a small pocket of Ham that is right here, but this whole area around Mesopotamia is the descendants of Shem. Now, why are we pointing this out? What would be the importance of the descendants of Shem being in that location? Who?
Abram comes from that.
Okay. So Shem's family, they're going to settle mostly there in Mesopotamia. And from Shem, we get Abraham, which is then going to connect us, link us to the next time period, which is going to be what? The patriarchs. All right. So I think this is the sign, for those of you that know sign language, this is the sign for father. All right. So that's that. What does patriarch mean? Father ruler. All right, so how many patriarchs were there? What did you say, Gil? More than 3. All right, so I saw 3. I heard more than 3. Norm said lots. Okay, that was a trick question, sorry. I said I wasn't going to make it tough. That was a trick question. Yes, obviously there's a lot of patriarchs in the Bible, but what are the 3 that we're mostly focused on? All right, so those are the 3. Why do we focus on those 3?
Jesus.
And what else?
Promises.
The promises. All right, so back to Shem, who then leads us to Abraham. Obviously, where do we find Abraham in the beginning? All right, so you've got the scattering of the people. So they're scattered. the descendants of Shem are here in this Mesopotamian region. And if we zoom in just a little bit, we see Shinar, and then we see right there Ur. All right, so to me, this is just a visual. It helps me to recognize, okay, they went from Mount Ararat down to the valley of Shinar in the Mesopotamian area, and that's where Ur is at. That's where we get Abraham, which is going to bring us to the patriarchs. All right, so we've got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what are the three promises?
Nation, land.
Seed. All right, so how are we then going to get from the patriarchs to the next time period? What's the connecting story or the connecting person? What do you think? All right, so Joseph, we have, I got to catch up with my slides here. You got to make sure you see the pictures. And I will point out, I'll never forget this now too. So after they were allowed to start eating meat, Brother Bill told me if we jump all the way back, they're looking pretty puny. And now all of a sudden, they were able to start eating meat. And they actually grew a little bit. So we've got from the patriarchs, we've got the story of Joseph. And this actually takes us through the book of Genesis. Just looking forward to cycle 3, cycle 3. And so we've got Joseph going through the end of the book of Genesis. So that takes us from the patriarchs to what?
The Exodus.
All right. So how did they get down to where they needed to exit? Obviously, they end up from here all the way down, and that is through the story of Joseph. And I almost said something about the sermon on Sunday, but y'all weren't in McEwen listening to the sermon on Sunday. So Evan actually preached on Joseph. But that is the linking story between that and the Exodus. And so what was the reason that they needed to exit?
Persecuted.
Okay.
They were enslaved.
Okay.
Yep. So there's a promise that had been made, but what was one of the other promises that was being fulfilled while they were? All right, so we've got the nation promise being fulfilled there. So as they are, so we've got the Exodus, which is this. All right, so let's just go through all of them. All right. Before the flood, scattering of people. All right, so obviously this is what? Parting of the Red Sea. And they're exiting. All right, they're getting out. So as they travel, of course, they cross the Red Sea. And then where are they traveling to? What mountain did they go to? All right, what's important about that? Okay, so there's some pretty significant events that happen there at Sinai that we'll talk about more whenever we get to cycle 2. And then as they're traveling, as they're exiting Exodus and they're working up to the Promised Land, where do they end up before they enter into the Promised Land?
Wandering in the wilderness.
Okay.
Before that happens, she said they were wandering in the wilderness, but before that happens, where did they stop before going into the Promised Land?
Kadesh.
Barnea, or if you're from California, Barnea. So they stopped there, and what happened?
The spies.
Okay.
So the spies go into the land, and they say, yeah, let's go get them. 2 of them. So there's a rebellion that we can't do this. I don't know what God was thinking, but these people are huge. They got fortified cities. We can't do this. So they basically turn their back on God. So there's going to have to be punishment for that. And that leads us to what Ms. Shirley said, the next one, which is the wandering in the wilderness. So they're just kind of aimlessly wandering in the wilderness. All right, you see how it all just kind of flows together? I mean, when you put it all together and you kind of think about it, it just all flows from one to the next. So they committed rebellion there, and so they're wandering in the wilderness. And So obviously, we're not still wandering, so they had to have quit wandering. Why would they have quit wandering? Huh?
That's a big part of it.
40 years are up, but still, what has to be fulfilled? There's still a promise that God had made to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that had to be fulfilled. And so they're going to now be able to enter into this land, and what are they told to do? Okay, so ultimately, what was the end game? You've got to conquer it. How are you going to do that? You're going to defeat. You're going to go to battle. And God tells them to do what to everybody? Utterly destroy them. All right, so then they are going to invade and conquer. So we've got the invasion and conquest. So we've got wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest. All right, let's go through all of them again. Before the flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the Exodus. So y'all got to quit looking at me. I'm looking at you. I need to quit doing it just so I can make sure y'all do it. So we've got invasion and conquest. Man, I'm way behind. Y'all got to keep me clicking here. All right, so we're to the invasion and conquest. All right, so at this point now, which of the promises have been fulfilled?
All right,
So
so
we got the land, we got the nation. So what does that leave? All right, we still got the seed promise. So what was the reason that God told them to completely destroy, utterly destroy the people of the land? What were the people known for? Idolatry.
all right.
And so we know that they didn't fulfill God's command in that regard, and they didn't completely destroy them. And so what happened because of that? What happens when you are around influence there? God's pretty smart. He knew all along that you got to get rid of this so that you're not influenced by it. They didn't get rid of all of it, so they were influenced by it. And so what happened?
The judges. They needed judges too. When they rebelled, God punished them, and then as a result of after the punishment, then they asked for forgiveness, and then they brought up a judge to.
So who's the main, outside of God, who's the main character during this time period? All right. So Joshua dies, and what happens? Everybody's like, we're going to live like Joshua. We're going to dare to stand like Joshua. What happened? All right, turn over to Judges 2, verse 10. We're going to go ahead and throw a little bit of cycle 3 in here. Francis, if you don't mind, read Judges 2:10.
When all the generations had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. All
right, so after Joshua, the next generation, they didn't know the Lord, and Israel became unfaithful. That's the linking connection between the next time period, which Norm kind of said, and Clarissa said, there's this cycle that starts. And so there's this cycle that starts where the people become unfaithful, and they're punished, and then they reach out to God, and who does God send? So since we're already in Judges 2, verse 10, Brother Bill, can you read verse 16?
Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them.
All right, so you've got this cycle that just goes over and over and over, where they're unfaithful and they're punished, They ask God to help them, so he sends a deliverer, he sends a judge, and then there's peace for a time, and then it's rinse, wash, rinse, repeat. Like it's just over and over and over and over again. And this goes from, who's the first judge? All right, so Othniel's the first judge. Ken, who's the last judge?
Good job.
All right, so we're going from Othniel to Samuel. So what's the connection, or what causes this time period of the judges to end with Samuel? They wanted a king. 1 Samuel chapter 8, and this is in verses 4 through 6. So they come to Samuel and they're like, we want to be like everybody else. We want a king. And Samuel took offense to it. And he goes to God and he gives them a king. So that takes us from the judges to the kingdom. Y'all got to help me out on the clicking thing. My mind's just on talking about it, not showing you pictures, but I got to show you the pictures. All right, so this is the United Kingdom. Judges. That's a gavel. All right, the judges. From the judges to the United Kingdom. Now, what's the significance of saying United Kingdom? How come we just don't say kingdom? Okay, see? There's this little mind thing that Brother Bob must have been pretty smart. If it's going to be united, if you specifically say united, it's probably going to be divided at some point. So see, that should just lead you from one to the next. Again, you just see how it all kind of ties together. So we've got the United Kingdom. And what kings do we have during the United Kingdom? Saul, David, Solomon. So we've got the three of the United Kingdom. What caused the division? How did the kingdom go from united to divided?
Rehoboam.
Where do you think he got some of his influence from? And probably from his daddy too. So we've got the United Kingdom, now the divided kingdom. All right, so we've split. Now, which one's up in the north? All right, so we've got Israel that's up in the north, Judah's down in the south. So this is very important. Again, it's a memory tool, so you don't need to split them. Now we've got the divided kingdom. And then if you say, what's the next one? All right, well, how do we get to there? How do we get from the divided kingdom to now there's just one?
Who took? Somebody took them?
The Syrians.
All right,
So, they're unfaithful. So God allows them to be taken into captivity. And so we end up with Judah alone. And you got to remember, because it's not, I just took Judah away. All right? So Israel's on the north, Judah's on the south. So then you take Israel away, you got Judah alone. All right? See how it kind of all makes sense? If it ain't making sense, you need to let me know. Because in my mind, it's making sense. Y'all may be looking at me like, man, this don't make a lick of sense. I don't know what you're talking about. How are you ever going to remember this? See, in my mind, it's actually making sense. So we've got the United Kingdom. Then we got the divided kingdom. And then we've got Judah alone. All right, so Israel goes into captivity. Thank you, Norm. All right, so Solomon's unfaithfulness and Rehoboam. If you can remember that, that kind of gets you from the United Kingdom to the divided kingdom. And now we've got two kingdoms. And yes, Israel is taken away. The Assyrian Empire came and took Israel away. And so we're left with Judah alone. Now, did Judah remain faithful to the Lord and they just lived happily ever after?
No.
nope. All right.
What happened to Judah alone?
All right, so now
They're going to be taken away into captivity. And this is the Babylonians that are now going to take them into captivity. And so we've got the United Kingdom, the divided kingdom, Judah alone. Now everybody's where? Now everybody's in captivity. All right? Handcuffs. So they're cuffed. They're in captivity. All right? I remember that time. All right, so are we still in captivity? Okay, so what happened? All right, so whenever they return, so we go from captivity to return from captivity. What are we doing? All right, so did the return just all happen just all at once and everybody just comes back? All right, what happened during the return? Anybody remember how many groups? All right, there were 3 groups. Remember what the first group did? Rebuilt the temple first with the first group. What did the second group do? They rebuilt the wall, and then the final group, and then the final group resettled the area, and so now everybody is back. And so during this time, turn over to Amos chapter 8. God makes a prophecy of what's fixing to happen. So we go from the captivity to the return from captivity. And Daniel, we're up to you. If you'll read Amos 8, chapter 11.
Verse 11.
I'm sorry, what?
Verse 11.
Amos 8, verse 11. Yes. Sorry, I don't know what to do.
Be certain of this, the time is coming, says the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land, not a shortage of food or water, but an end to divine revelation. People will stagger from sea to sea, and from the north around to the east. They will wander about looking for a revelation from the Lord, but they will not find any.
All right, what's God saying he's going to be? Silent. All right, so we've got the United Kingdom, the divided kingdom, Judah alone. They're going to captivity, return from captivity. Now you've got the years of silence. The kids, a lot of them will do 400 years of silence, and it's fine if you want to do that. To me, that takes too long to say, so I just say years of silence. But it is about 400 years, and so that brings us to the years of silence. Some people call it the intertestamental period or between the covenants. Why is that not really a very good descriptive name? Okay. She said the covenant was still in effect. Was there ever a gap? No, obviously when Christ died, then the old covenant was done away with and the new covenant came into effect immediately. So there's not an intertestamental or between the covenants. There wasn't that period. This was just the years of silence. Norm?
It's kind of interesting that the time that the Joseph's family was in the incubator, it was around 400 years, 400 plus. And the incubator was ginned up again in the 400 years between the covenants for the world to be ready for the coming of Christ. So kind of interesting that both of them are around 400 years.
Yeah.
All right, so God said, I'm going to be silent for a time. What ended the silence? All right, who's doing the proclaiming? All right, so we've got the years of silence. They're going to end whenever now we have the revelation of Christ, again, which is what it's all been leading up to. And so you've got the years of silence to the life of Christ. All right, so this is signifying the nails in the hands. All right, so we've got the life of Christ. And what was one of the purposes for Jesus coming to the earth?
To save the lost.
Okay. To establish the church. And so, what does that lead us to? The early church. And so, what's this? Church built on the rock. All right. So I think I've got it where the C is correct for you. All right. So the church built on the rock. So we've got the early church. And once the church is established, there's encouragement, there's edification, there's teaching that needs to be done. And so what is the remainder of the Bible? All right, so letters to the Christians. So you're kind of symbolizing like you're writing a letter. All right, does all of that make sense, or is that clear as mud? So I didn't do a very good job of the links. This is all in your book. So review these. So we will not, we'll review them, where we'll go through the 17 time periods, and we may do it at the beginning of every class. I don't know. And so just be prepared for that. We probably, maybe, might have a quiz on the 17 time periods, so be prepared for that. But look through these and get them all in your mind with the links and how they all tie together, because to me, it does help when you have this consistent flow from one to the other. And there may be an area that may be a trouble area for you, and focus more on that. So, and I mentioned this at the beginning, and I forgot to say it again. So my expectation is when you are in class that you're not sitting there looking at your book. I mean, obviously, you can. If I ask a question and you're just looking, it's pretty easy just to answer, but you're not actually putting it here if you're just looking off of a page. And so that's a resource for you to use at home to review from. And then when we get to class, again, my expectation is that you're not going to actually be looking through that. All right, so let's just run through all of the time periods from beginning to end with the hand motions. All right, so let's just do it one at a time. So we've got before the flood, and again, that's creation and the fall of man. And then we've got the flood, so the water rising. What's next? Scattering of the people. Next. Patriarchs. The Exodus. Wandering in the wilderness. Yeah, so they're no longer wandering. They're invading and conquering. The Judges. Yeah. Because there's this cycle that's happening because of the idolatry that they were influenced by. So we've got the Judges. And then from the Judges we go to, they ask for a king. So we've got the united kingdom. Well, it doesn't stay united forever. So we've got the divided kingdom. Israel's taken away into captivity. They're gone. See you later. Left with Judah alone. Now Judah gets taken into captivity, and so now we're all in captivity. Well, they don't stay in captivity. So they return from captivity. And God says, I'm not going to talk anymore for a long time. Got the years of silence. But then he does start talking again. Leads us to the life of Christ. Christ came to establish his church. So we've got the early church. Then we've got the letters to the Christians. Everybody got it? What'd you say? We just went from Genesis to Revelation in one class. Can you believe that? That's probably the most you've ever studied in one single 45-minute class. Norm?
One of the things that's really valuable about this is if you run into somebody that has not, really studied the Bible and everything, to be able to tell the Bible story in like just a few minutes like that really makes a big difference as far as the way they look at you. It's like, wow, and you're not trying to impress them. It's just the idea that it is one story. And if you're able to tell it as one story, you make more sense after that.
All right, so let's play a little game. Andy, what's the 17th time period? Last one. Melissa, what's the last one? Letters to the Christians. Francis, what comes before letters to the Christians? The early church. All right. April, what comes before the early church? The life of Christ. All right. Robert, what comes before the life of Christ?
Returning from captivity? Oh, years of silence.
Years of silence. All right. Gil, what comes before the years of silence?
Return from captivity.
Return from captivity. Clarissa, what's before the return from captivity? Captivity. Todd, what's before captivity?
The Judah alone.
Judah alone. All right. Ken, what's before Judah alone?
Divided kingdom.
All right. Jesse, what's before the divided kingdom? The United Kingdom. See, he knows the symbol, the United Kingdom. All right, Lena, what's before that? Judges. She was ready. All right, Bonnie, what's before the judges?
Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Ask somebody else.
All right. Erica, what's before the judges?
I'm trying to say it forward.
All right, what's before the judges? Invasion and conquest. All right. What's before invasion and conquest? All right, I see people doing this. Wandering in the wilderness. What's before that? The Exodus. All right, the Exodus. What's before that? Patriarchs. What's before that? Scattering of the people. Before that? The flood. And what's before that? See? It's just another learning tool. Obviously, if you can remember it backwards, it takes a little bit more effort to remember it backwards than it does forwards, but that lets you know you actually have got it. All right, so before next week, make sure that you are familiarizing yourself with cycle 1 and go ahead and start looking at the first few time periods with cycle 2. All right, thanks everybody.